and welcome to Pod's Own Country. I'm Jerry Scott, the Yorkshire Post Westminster correspondent, and we're back for another week giving you all the political news from around Yorkshire. Now, first of all, today you're going to hear me chatting to Wakefield Conservative MP Imran Ahmad Khan, and Imran's a really interesting character, right? Because he was elected in December, last December, nearly a year ago. I can't believe it was a year ago that I was following candidates around Yorkshire in the rain. But recently, he's joined this Northern research group that's been set up by Jake Berry, the former Northern Powerhouse minister, and they're really holding the government's feet to the fire, is how they describe it, on all these promises over improving life in the north. So we'll hear what he's got to say. And then Rob, our political editor, is going to join us later, and he's chatting to one of our local democracy reporters, George Tor, about everything that's going on the ground. So that's what we've got in store for you this week, and I hope you enjoy. Hi Imran, it's really, really good to have you on Pod's Own Country. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Jerry.
It's always good to talk, and we've been chatting a little bit this week, kind of back and forth, haven't we? Because it's all been all about levelling up again. Now, for listeners of Pod's Own Country, you hear me talk about levelling up quite a lot, and sometimes it's a phrase which cannot have too much meat on the bones, and it's not always been clear what it means, but we're getting more of an idea, which is really brilliant. But I guess to start off, Imran, what does levelling up mean to you?
Well, I think levelling up is not simply about pouring investment into the north of England, welcome though that is. It's not just about filling our northern towns and cities with concrete cranes and porter cabins. There are three stages of development that constitute levelling up. The first is building the foundations. Second is strengthening the focus. And the third is realising the ambition. And that's why I'm proud to be a member and support the Northern Research Group, because it's a very supportive way of holding the government's feet to the fire to ensure that the mighty mandate that the British people gave the Conservative Party is realised. Because all too often people talk about the December 2019 election. Can you believe it's a year ago now?
Oh, can you I can't believe it. Can you? Whole
No.
12 months. Does it feel like that to you? Surely not.
It feels quite a lot longer. But people talk about that election about being a one-issue election, Brexit, if you've forgotten. But I have a caveat, because it wasn't just about Brexit or the unpopularity of Mr. Corbyn, but I think more than anything, it was a final cry against regional inequality and of people in the north and across the country being distant and feeling a Pacific-wide chasm between them and their elected representatives, who they thought were no longer actually representing them. And so with that belief in regional inequality and being forgotten, that's why levelling up, I think, resonates. And so I mentioned about the three stages: building foundation, strengthening the focus, and realising the ambition. So what's building the foundations? Well, I've been working recently very closely with WPI Strategy, and they've produced a series of really excellent reports commissioned by Tesco.
Oh, really? How interesting.
Yeah, on levelling up and more broadly on business rates, and a marriage of two excellent pieces of work, which I honestly think are worth looking at for every listener. Now, I want to start, when I talk about their work and about levelling up, with where my constituency, Wakefield, is now. And I think Wakefield in many ways is emblematic of many of the small cities and towns in the north of England, across Yorkshire, that lent their vote to the Conservative Party and to Boris in order to stop the inequality of our region elsewhere. So WPI Strategies got a levelling up index. And there's three really painful truths that they evidence. The first in Wakefield is that financial dependency is 27% higher than the England and Wales average. That's focused on job seekers allowance and universal credit claims. The second is that deprivation is 21% higher than the England average.
Wow.
And thirdly, that empty commercial properties are a full third higher than the average for England and Wales. Now, that's bleak.
Yeah, that's grim, isn't it?
It, and so there's a lot of work to be done. And it's an area that is Wakefield, and indeed much of the urban part of Yorkshire, composed of areas that are currently dependent, but this is particularly true of Wakefield, on the provision of jobs by the state.
Mm.
And through years of successive failed policies enacted by governments, local and national, of all stripes. So I'm not making a party political point here. It's been decades and decades of successive failure of policies. And I think that these three data points, these three figures, are intrinsically linked, but it's a distinct culture that seems to have deified public administration and the burden of local democracy. And that's what's strangling my city of Wakefield at present. Close to 30%, 30% of everyone employed across Wakefield is actually employed in some form or other of public administration.
Oh, yeah.
So, these national structural issues that entrench regional inequality are, as I've said, essentially, we've got to face up to them as we're not going to change it. Decades and decades of policy failure.
And so, why has there been that kind of policy failure, do you think? And like you say, you're quite right. It has been governments of all stripes. Why hasn't this been addressed so far? Is it kind of lack of will or just not knowing how to?
I think it's a lack of understanding, a lack of will. And again, these are complex issues.
Mhm.
So I'll give you a really complex thing that causes a problem. That third point I told you about 33% higher than England and Wales average for empty commercial properties in
Yes.
Wakefield. So I think one of the large reasons for that, and it's evidenced, is look at business rates.
Mhm.
Over the last 20 years, there's been a huge, it's a huge determinant, business rates, of why there's so many empty commercial properties across the north of England. And it outstrips the south by a huge degree. And it's because our burden of property-based taxes with business rates and so on is so much higher in places like Yorkshire than the affluent parts of the south.
Mm.
So WPI and Strategy and Tesco, they put forward a really novel part of a overall solution. So it is complex, which looked at a reduction in business rates by creating a revenue neutral policy that would substitute the existing receipts as they stand today on business rates. Now, the listener may raise a eyebrow about the altruistic or not nature of a large corporate supermarket, and with good reason, and with good reason. But they were specific exemptions in their modelling for SMEs, small and medium enterprises,
Okay.
and online retail under a specific threshold. So what a lot of larger retailers realise is that, like Tesco and Asda and so on, is that their utility within the market is as a role, as part of a broader ecosystem, alongside an independent offering on the high street, in creating an overall commercial experience that marries utility and enjoyment, dependent on the requirements of the individual at one point in time. However, I would actually go a lot further than their very interesting solution, because I would reduce business rates even further, um, beyond the point of past neutrality and revenue neutrality, because it's an antiquated and largely screwed system,
Mhm.
whereby the only reason for its continued existence that I can see is the failure to come up with another. So the Tax Foundation report that I was reading, which is a different report using 2018 data, there the UK has surprisingly, it shocked me when I first read it, the highest reliance on property tax of any European OECD nation
Oh, I
by
didn't know
quite
that.
a way. 12.3% of all tax revenues in the UK are through property tax collections.
Oh.
In Germany, it's a mere 2.7%. And shockingly, because we've all heard about French property taxes, the French are behind us at 8.9%.
Oh wow, okay, I see.
So looking for a like-for-like replacement of business rates is basically folly. And it doesn't consider the societal and technological changes and the relationship that commerce has with property. So business rates are but one piece of the puzzle of a comprehensive tax reform of the United Kingdom for both property and the wider commercial environment. So two questions need to be answered regarding property. One, how do we deploy extant buildings to best use? And two, how do we ensure further construction and development relieves the chronic issues at the heart of the housing and planning system that are a preventative glass ceiling for a generation of professionals and young families? So right now, I really do believe we've got an opportunity to fundamentally smash the status quo and truly incentivize entrepreneurialism and as the method through which to recover from the pandemic. And so, there's the great risk and the harm the pandemic has done, but there's opportunity because, as I've tried to make clear, I hope it is, it's a complex and dull, boring issue to many people, property rates and so on. But if we're going to deal with something as fundamental as the death of our high streets and the impact of the business rates being a part of that disease, then you've got to actually come up with solutions. And there's no, as I've tried to make clear, no simple easy solution. It's about lots of little bits to change the overall plan. And I do apologise to the listener having to listen to me droning on possibly boring tax policy, but it
Well,
does
not at
matter.
all. Not at all, because you're right, it does matter. And you say kind of that it might be dull and boring, but these things are important. And I think the point is that maybe there was, it goes back to what we were saying about why it hasn't been addressed. There weren't people that knew about this stuff and knew the impact of it before kind of December who were banging on about it to talk about that. And it sounds like there are people like yourself who really get it, are really entrenched in it, kind of banging that drum to government right now.
Well, I think, Jerry, I would never argue with you. I know far too well to do that. In all of my wonderful conversations with him, I've generally agreed with you. And if I haven't, you've got me to agree it by the end of them.
You're too kind. You're too kind. Well, on that kind of thread, you'll remember, aren't you, of this Northern Research Group that you mentioned? And I know there's more than 60 Conservative MPs who are part of this, and
I
there've been
think it's
letters.
around 70 or so.
70 now. Oh well, the membership's increased since I last checked. That's what we like to hear.
So's the majority.
And you know, we know that there have been letters written to the Prime Minister, and that you met with him virtually, nonetheless, because he's self-isolating this week.
Twice in the last 2 days.
There we go. He's very keen to speak to you, obviously. What is the kind of, I guess, what's the point of the Northern Research Group? You mentioned kind of holding feet to the fire. Is it really to press these issues that we're talking about today home to those in Whitewall and make sure they're aware of them?
Well, the wonderful thing is, and you were asking why has there been these long-term problems, I honestly put it down to the political topography, the political map of Yorkshire and the north of England. For too long, it's been a sea of red, or a red wall. Now that has come down, you've got people who no longer believe in or follow discredited Keynesian economics, but actually have a commercial appreciation, understand that the engine for this country is business. And there's only two ways that we can pay for a first-class national health service, a first-rate education system, brilliant defences, intelligence services, police and judiciary. And that comes either from revenues, tax revenues from business, or tax revenues from households. And the majority of households derive their businesses their income by being employed by business. So essentially business at the heart of it. So rather than being skeptical of business, hating free enterprise, hating the private sector, always regarding them as something slightly an undiscovered beast that we're a little bit scared of, a Cerberus in the cupboard, I am unashamedly pro-business, unashamedly support private enterprise and encourage it. And I believe that the solutions to the biggest problems we deal with as a city, as a county, as a country, are actually found those solutions in private enterprise. A wonderful example of that is just right now with the vaccines that hopefully will be online very shortly, which is entirely because of big pharma and private enterprise.
Hmm.
Indeed, to such a degree that with Pfizer and BioNTech, they refuse to actually take revenues or monies from the United States Warp Speed program because their chief executive said he doesn't want any form of, and I quote, bureaucracy strangling them. Uh,
Wow.
uh, and they've come up with it and all of these vaccines. So private sector is very important. Now, the reason now we have got so many conservatives across the north is that you have a change of thinking where we believe in opportunities, pathway to opportunity. We know that those opportunities are found by people getting skills, getting educations, having the drive and the ambition to actually achieve something and realize ambitions, improve their lives. Um, and we are there. I think there's few people who understand or wish the better for their constituents than the member of parliament.
Hmm.
And so the Northern Research Group has got, as I say, a great number of us members of parliament, many of us, most of us probably newly elected, who have knocked on thousands of doors, continue to speak with our constituents, deal with our local chambers of commerce and businesses and so on. And we know what their problems are and the opportunities. And we're there to advocate for them. And also, we know how they can get on. So now we've got the huge lobbying might of all of these, I would say, right minded Tories in the governing party providing real detail to the overarching strategic view that the Prime Minister so well delineated in the general election. And we're there to help focus and direct so that despite a global pandemic and despite all of the other issues that the government has to contend with, that this remains the central thrust for us in the North in delivering the levelling up agenda. So
Hmm.
the initial reports were entirely mistaken, sort of trying to suggest that the NRG was some form of anti-Boris movement. We're there, yes, to help hold the feet of the government to the fire, but to enable them to be strength to the elbow by being able to direct and encourage and advise how best to get this done.
That was going to be one of my questions, actually, because one of your colleagues, Scarborough and Whitby MP Robert Goodwill, when I spoke to him after the meeting the other night, said, this is a very collegiate group. We are supportive of the government. And actually, the quote was that the NRG is nothing like the ERG, which, as we well know, was a little bit more rebellious, let us
Well,
say.
I read that article and I was delighted with it because the second part of your headline, you used the quote from me.
I did, yes, 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 I did, because we spoke after that meeting as well. But everyone I spoke to from the group from Yorkshire that night was very happy and felt very very kind of positive about the situation. There wasn't any kind of rumblings of dissent that I picked up.
There
Is
was
that
none,
your
and that's
kind
why
of?
I told you it was true
Mm,
that the mood of the parliamentary party is lifted, and there's a return. I see it, a return to the exuberance of the new year,
mm,
where we had all together with this wonderful, radical, imaginative, daring, ambitious program for the North, for Yorkshire, and the United Kingdom. And COVID has you know, interrupted lots. But
mm,
now, as I told you, we see light at the end of the COVID tunnel. And actually, the fact that the entire economy is going to require such great assistance and help and to be restarted, um, in a way, is an opportunity for the North
mm.
because so much has to be done anyway. Let's now remove these structural and regional inequalities by providing a fairer, a greater share to the North now, so then we don't have the inequality that we were talking about earlier. And a very important part of the second part of leveling up, which I was telling you about, is the focus
Mm.
and strengthening the focus. And for that, connectivity is key to leveling up.
Mhm.
And so I'll just tell you in a very, very what affects me in Wakefield. I'm working with Dan Jarvis, the Labour Member of Parliament and my very near neighbour for Barnsley Central,
Yes.
and the city region mayor for Sheffield. And a man I have great time and respect for. I like him a great deal.
Mm.
He's clever enough, smart enough, and bright enough, and commercially minded enough to be a Tory. But I'm sure he won't like. I'm sure he won't thank me for saying
I
that.
was going to say, I'm sure he'll thank you for that
I'm
comment
sure he
greatly.
won't thank me for saying that. But I think his majority is secure, even to withstand my praise. But I'm working with him to on an East Midlands line connecting Barnsley to Wakefield.
Okay.
It's a wonderful journey. It's one my mother made. She was born in Barnsley and now lives in Wakefield. I think there'll be lots of demands for one-way tickets south to north. But there you go. And then, I'm also currently reassessing the feasibility studies to reopen a station at the Healy Mills site in Ossett
Oh,
ahead of the
interesting.
third round of Ideas Fund.
Mhm.
And there was a case put forward in 2009 in the Connecting Communities report, which stated that Ossett was the largest town in Yorkshire without a railway station. And it has an impressive benefit cost ratio of 9.8. So I really think we should go ahead with that. Sadly, in 2009, had I been Member of Parliament and read that report, I would have made sure that case went all the way through and we got a railway station. So let's hope that I can use the 2009 data and make the case now, despite all the massive competing demands on the public purse, because I think Ossett definitely deserves a railway station. It should not be the largest town in Yorkshire without one. And it would massively connect up the west part of my constituency to the main city and actually uh, beyond. And when I say beyond, what I think is essential to Yorkshire and certainly to Wakefield is a rail service that really links Wakefield to Manchester Airport, Liverpool, Huddersfield, and Manchester.
Mm.
From Wakefield, we have wonderful connections to Leeds. You can get there in 8 or 12 minutes
Mhm.
from Westgate station. But that, if we had HS3 or the Transpennine or whatever, we're going to have that super fast new rail service. To be able to have Wakefield going to Manchester Airport in 40 minutes or 35 minutes to Piccadilly or thereabouts would be a real change for northern connectivity. And so I'm massively pushing for that. And I think it's an essential stream. I mean, if people want, they can even allow it to continue on to Leeds. I've got no problem with that.
If they want it, if
But,
they
but
want
the
it.
true city of West Yorkshire anyway is of course Wakefield. And I'm
Obviously.
still sore that they took our diocese away and transplanted it in Leeds, which the Romans originally named it, and it means that it's not a particularly pleasant place. I think that's the actual Latin meaning. But I've always gone for the city of Wakefield. But Leeds is a very pleasant place. I love it. I'm only teasing.
I feel a campaign coming on.
It's not Lancashire. That's what I can say.
I
Uh,
feel that,
but
so all that sounds really, really positive, right? So the stuff that you could do locally and the stuff that you can lobby for nationally is really, really good, and it's it's a vision that a lot of us would share. But what happens if the government doesn't start delivering on these things? We've spoken about how there's a collegiate attitude. You're all very supportive, but is it if that is the case, and the government maybe doesn't follow through on its promises, does the NRG then become more challenging?
well, there's two things here. Um, Naturally, I cannot even begin to imagine a time when a Conservative government led by Boris Johnson would not maintain its manifesto commitments to the North.
Mhm.
It absolutely shall. It will. The idea it won't is one it is not a possibility. It's beyond the realm of possibility. I could get into some sort of almost Rumsfeldian talk about known unknowns and unknown unknowns and impossibilities that are beyond the realm of possibility. But I'll save your viewers any of that esoteric nonsense. Uh, but uh, what is key, though, isn't just simply the state. So it's an important point. So the state is very, very important in supporting private regions to help connect us better, and providing the framework, the guarantees to connect places up. But the private sector is very, very important too. And what we need is public funds, and then allow a tax policy and a deregulation of our economy and business that then allows private sector money to flow where the vanguard may have been public sector. And for Wakefield, the case for the public sector and the private sector is very, very simple. The case for Wakefield to be a centre of public and private investment, both British and overseas, is one that makes itself. We must market Wakefield more effectively. Our logistical prowess and position at the crossroads of the kingdom. I've been trying to rebrand Wakefield the crossroads of the kingdom, as it is, with the A1, the M1, the M62. 90% of the population of England is within a 3-hour or so drive. London is less than 2 hours away by train. Our cultural experience, nowhere outside of London can boast such world-class cultural venues. And we need, such as the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which has a whole forest of Gormleys, Moores, and Barbara Hepworths, amongst others. A pre-Edinburgh Fringe would be perfect for Wakefield post-COVID, where the shows go on. We need to create a really attractive inward investment climate and a more favourable business environment. But how? How do we do that? So this is where the public sector, along with the private sector, need to actually have a joined-up approach. And of course, for that, the government needs to take the lead. So I spoke earlier about the 3 stages of development for the levelling up agenda. The first being building the foundations, second, strengthening the focus. And this is where we come to the final stage, realising the ambition. And so to realise the ambition, the most important thing, the alpha and omega, is allowing our people, our citizens, my constituents, the people across Yorkshire and the north, to acquire the skills they need and we need as a country, and that they need to get high paying, high value, quality jobs. And so, when I knocked on the doors a year ago and I speak to my constituents now, it broke my heart, and it still tears at me when I meet young people, actually even middle-aged people, where there is no hope. They've lost hope.
Yes.
And without hope, you can't have aspiration. And without aspiration, there are no achievements. And I refuse to accept that the story of Wakefield, or the glorious story of our United Kingdom, has no future. We have to keep those pages inscribed with new achievements. And how do we do that? We do that by encouraging people to believe in themselves, to believe in their city, to believe in their country, and then providing them with opportunities. The opportunity to get relevant skills so they can either get the jobs that we seek to attract to Wakefield and across the north, or they can actually set up their own businesses. Small and medium enterprises employ the largest number of people in the economy. They're absolutely crucial. So it's how we rebuild this opportunity. And unfortunately, again, it's not a party political point. I believe our education that we offer young people is not fit for purpose. It's not simply about bringing back grammar schools. They were great in their time and place. It's about a whole new way of learning. And it's radical and it's difficult. And it has to take it's a great deal of bravery to do this. But, in the iPhone, or the telephone that you use right now, there's probably more, there's certainly more information in there at my access at my fingertips or my command with my voice than in the entire Library of Congress, House of Commons Library, and the Bodleian Library put together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer about learning facts. What we need to be encouraging people to do is problem solve.
Mm-hmm.
Soft skills, they call them soft skills, but I think nothing's harder. How to deal with others, how to sell something, how to describe something, how to explain a concept. These are what are the skills that our young people require. The facts are like just not even the punctuation. That's what you insert to evidence. It's the skills. And our system of education doesn't do that. We were created, it was a ghastly disaster, in my opinion, when we converted all the polytechnics. It was, and I believe it was John Major, a Conservative Prime Minister, who did this,
Mm-hmm.
converted all the polytechnics into universities.
Yes.
Leeds Beckett used to be Leeds Polytechnic.
Mm-hmm.
And up and down the kingdom, this occurred. I believe that for most things, and I'm fortunate, I have a few degrees from some of the best places you could go. But I tell you, everything I really hold valuable and that I really believe are the lessons that are equip me for the world are things I've learned with people in the real world, with work or travel or experience, not necessarily academically. So you've got to teach people how to think for themselves. And that is going to be a big shift. I mean, at the moment in Wakefield, we have some really good education establishments, both privately through Wakefield Girls High School, Queggs, Silcoats, and although I'm an old Silcoatian and my chief of staff went to Queggs, and so did my brother, and they always told me it was an inferior school. But there we go. Wakefield College is superb, and I'll tell you about when I talk about a new form of education.
Yes.
Kappa College. I visited them,
Mm-hmm.
and they are led by an amazing leadership team. At the moment, they're in temporary, they're not in their permanent accommodation. The government has funded, and they're building right now, right outside Wakefield Westgate Station, the superstructure there, multi-million-pound, gorgeous edifice is emerging from Westgate, which is going to house the young men and women who go to Kappa College. But Kappa College is presently in Trinity Hall across the road in Wakefield, and they have this wonderful, inspiring, brilliant leadership where you walk in and you just feel inspired.
Mm.
And you see it in the young people who go there. Kappa draw a large enough portion of their young boys and girls and men and women that study there from some of the most, what are thought of to be some of the most deprived areas of Wakefield.
Yes.
Yet, they're in the top 1% of schools. They've got a 100%. I was going to steal a percent off them. They have 100% pass rate, I believe,
Oh, wow.
A to C in their examinations.
That's impressive, isn't it?
And they teach dance and music and theatrical art, and yet they have fabulous academic qualifications. So it's about inspiring people, teaching people in a new way. With them in mind, and I'm currently analysing all the existing skills offering within Wakefield, and what further institutions can be created alongside providers that are already there or providing new education facilities. So, for example, on the back of defence spending that's been announced, I think it'd be worth floating the idea, and I was at the United Kingdom Defence Academy at Scrivenham and speaking to the commandant there about the idea of maybe setting up a preschool in Wakefield, supported by the Defence Academy, because of course Wakefield is already a great reservoir for the armed forces and talent for the armed forces. I have in the Wakefield district, there are all 4,000, off the top of my head, 4,360 veterans.
Oh, right.
And that's those who are registered and have returned after their service to the nation, living in Wakefield. And I believe that if we had a school that was a technical, highlighted and emphasized the technical skills that we require in how highly professional armed forces. And when we think of the armed forces, and with the government's announcement of the extra funding for armed forces, we are all familiar with fighting in the air, on the land, and upon the sea, and indeed with our fabulous submariners under the seas. But also the two other theatres of battle and warfare that we must conquer are space and cyber.
Yes.
And so if we had a school taking young people, instilling in them the values and the discipline of the armed forces, and also the technical skills required in this highly professional, organized, and technical service of the nation, that will equip people not only with the ability to join our armed forces and to continue that great history and precedent that Wakefield and Yorkshire has with supporting our armed forces in the defence of the realm, but also that the same skills required, for example, by Ring, who do metalwork that help to parts that they produce in Wakefield, near the Chantry Chapel, are on HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, and indeed on the Eurofighter.
Yes.
So those same skills are required in other businesses that we seek to attract. And this comes again to going back to your point, how we get the private sector to come in. Because if you've got the necessary skills, then it makes my case as an advocate, an ambassador for Wakefield, which I want to be, to attract investment and business, both from within the United Kingdom and from outside of the United Kingdom, into Wakefield. So we build, whether it's manufacturing jobs or services, whatever they may well be, we get those businesses and those jobs into Wakefield. And the way you get those is by actually having people and a constant supply of people with the skills that business and industry, commerce requires to employ them. And so that's why, not only by giving people ambition individually, young people and others, but also allowing them to realize that ambition by allowing them to actually have the skills, but then also with those skills, it attracts the investment where they get employment. And the state's important with that, but in the end, the private sector is the most important thing. So what it is about us making sure that the private sector and the public sector work arm in arm for one purpose and one purpose alone. And that purpose is the general well-being and uplift of the citizens of the United Kingdom. And for me, my constituents in Wakefield, they are central and key. And this again is going to sound a little bit nerdy, and I beg forgiveness.
We like nerdy on Pod Zone Country.
But the unit of analysis that is employed in government delivery needs to be changed. At the moment, the unit of analysis is groups, areas. I believe the unit of analysis employed needs to be one. The individual, the number one. Whether it's in regards to pensions, healthcare provision, education, every aspect, if we have the technology now, we just need to employ it better. And this is again where the private sector is great, because most public sector technology projects have not had the best outcomes. They're not known for their great efficacy, but we can build up. So the citizen becomes the focus. And so the unit of analysis is indeed one. And this is how we actually rebalance the relationship between state and citizen at a time when the state is involving itself more and more into every aspect of human life, where you can shop, what you can buy, who you can be around your table for Christmas, who you can sleep with in this time of COVID. Every aspect of human life is now governed. It's really important temporarily, and that will change as soon as we, and as I said, lights at the end of the tunnel. But when the Prime Minister and we Conservatives talk about the recalibrating the relationships between state and citizen, and the state is servant, is slave, and the citizen is king, is master. How do we absolutely do this when actually the requirements of the state are growing? So when the people say they want something to be delivered, then it is the responsibility of legislators and the government to ensure that it's provided. So how do we actually make sure that the citizen is the master? I think technology's got a big role to do with that. So if we tailor everything to the citizen, and he or she becomes the focus, the object, and the state is simply serving him or her. And that's why with technology, we can absolutely reset and repurpose the state and its relationship with the citizen, who is, after all, the boss.
So that's really interesting to me, that idea of the citizen being the boss. You're quite right, because the reason the concept is interesting to me, I think, is because yourself included, but a lot of the new intake from last year are, I wouldn't call you rebellious, maybe I would privately, but
You could call me far worse than that privately.
not rebellious against the government. That's not what I quite mean. But all of you in your intake, I get the feeling, are quite, I've seen you stand up in the Commons and really speak for Wakefield, which sometimes has been at odds with what the government has been saying. And is that concept of, the citizen being king, the citizen being the boss, is that what kind of comes through there when you do that? Because obviously you're all party politicians, you are supportive of the government, you've said that, but it does seem like the real key to your mission, if you like, as a member of parliament, is to deliver for your citizens, for your constituents.
Well, Jerry, once again, you're just demonstrating your great deep levels of perception. I think at the end, it's not so much that we're rebellious. We've got our own minds, but then again, we believe in the individual. And society is made up of individuals. And so we believe in society and the individual, both. You can't have one without the other. The society is like the beach, and the individual is like the grain of sand. It composes. If you had a beach without the grains of sand, you're walking on glass. And those who live in glass houses. But anyway, that's a tangent. It's also because so many of us are. From Redcar to Wakefield, Yorkshiremen. And in Yorkshire, we like to call, as I always say, a spade a shovel. And not only that, not only is it our frank speaking way and nature, and the fact that we don't think we're worse than anybody else, so we can tell anybody else where to go or what we think, because our constituents in Wakefield are every bit as good, I would argue, far better than people from Winchester or anywhere else. But it's also because we've seen far too often, there's too many examples of Labour using the North, Labour using Yorkshire as a place to transplant their big figures who don't really actually care about the North, and they didn't listen or respond or represent fully as their most important singular priority their constituents. For me, a local lad from Wakefield, schooled in Wakefield, whose father was a doctor at the Pinderfields Hospital, whose mother was a nurse there, whose grandmother was a night sister there, whose great-grandfather was a Methodist preacher in the area. Wakefield is everything that I'm fighting for. I think there's a great deal to be said of having candidates who are from a place, for a place, and simply, it's not a place to have to go under sufferance. It's a place that is home. And so that gives you a certain degree of confidence and passion, and you're never going to let them down. And also, if you're not a true representative, and you don't actually represent the people, you're going to be kicked out. And that's been shown. When we had people who, only fair weather Democrats, which we had before the last election, where they only seemed to agree with the majority when the majority agreed with them, and otherwise they were, regarded as a stupid or racist or downright wrong, and that chasm, that split, was shown with Brexit.
Yes.
And that again is having people who aren't local, who aren't connected viscerally and in the most sanguine of ways to their own constituencies and constituents. There is a disconnect. And I think what you're talking about now isn't just as Northern Tory MPs, it's because we are Northern Tory MPs, it is because we represent and we are from the places and the people we represent. And it's indivisible. It's possible to split the atom, but it's not possible to split me from Wakefield, or, for example, Jacob Young from Redcar.
More than that, they'll corner your mum in the supermarket, I'm sure. Well, what a note to end on. It's been a really interesting chat, Imran, because there's so much to cover on this, and I'm sure we'll be talking again kind of in the coming, weeks and years, I'm sure, because I'm not going anywhere, and it doesn't sound like you are either.
If you left Westminster, I'd have to review my permanence. Of course, I'm kidding. I will stay for as long as the people of Wakefield. As long as the people of Wakefield make it clear that I can serve them and wish me to serve them, I'm their servant. And it's the greatest honour of my life to be so.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been lovely to chat.
Take care. Bye-bye.